Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to another Climbing the Rating Ladder video. I'm playing Sam 19623, rated 1404. They open with e4. What shall I play this time around? Let's go with Alekhine's defense, knight f6 in response to e4. Alekhine's defense. I'm going to say the kind of westernized Alekhine's defense because I think that's what most of you are familiar with. I completely acknowledge that that is not the correct pronunciation. It's easier for me to say personally. So, all right, let's play d5 here. White responded with knight c3, defending the pawn on e4. I'm treading into Scandinavian territory here, although not a pure Scandinavian, because if white takes, we're taking with the knight. Yes, my queen could land on d5 in the case of a trade. That would, in fact, be an improved version of a normal Scandi, though, because white doesn't have another knight that can come to c3, at least right away. So let's see if white does that. They also might play e5, in which case, and they do play that, I can decide between knight f to d7 here or d4, the counter-attacking move d4. Now, d4 leads to some drawish positions, so I'm going to play knight f d7. Not a big fan of knight e4. I think the pawn's a little overextended there. And you might be saying, John, aren't you hanging your pawn on d5 here? Yes, I am offering for that pawn to be captured, but I will take white's pawn on e5, and I'll be doing so with tempo in hitting the pawn. So, okay, white plays d4. Let's go ahead and play e6, defend this, and we are getting very much into a French defense style position. In fact, I think it could be a direct transposition to one of the French main lines, because I'm going to try to line up c5. And in fact, I see no reason not to play it right away. So white has the space advantage in the center with the d4 plus e5 pawn duo versus my e6 and d5 duo. But in playing c5, especially when there's no pawn that can come to c3 to support the structure, it starts to creak a little bit, right? White's structure starts to become visibly vulnerable, especially if I play knight c6, maybe queen b6 at some point. Watch for the e5 pawn in particular to be a loose point for white. Okay, and bishop d3. So that may already be a mistake, because if I take on d4 and white takes back with their knight, I can take the pawn on e5. And the only thing I'm going to consider before I make a decision is if after pawn takes d4, knight e2, I still stand to gain this pawn. I could play knight c6 at that point, maybe bishop f4, but I don't see that working out so well. I have bishop b4 check or queen b6. So I think I'm going to take knight c6 as another main candidate move, just applying pressure here. Also looks plenty good, but if I see this opportunity to take right away, I don't think I'm going to pass that up. c4 could be an option too, especially if white's queen were sitting on e2. That would be a great move to trap the bishop. But let's go with the capture on d4. It looks like the most direct move. And that's why a couple moves back, white may have been better served to play f4. f4 to have the f-pawn defend the pawn from the outside. So, okay, knight takes d4. Let's take on e5. I have moved this knight around a fair amount. I've already made 3 moves within the first 7 moves with this particular piece. But for a central pawn, when my king is still relatively safe, we're willing to make that sort of sacrifice. So, all right, queen e2. I can take the bishop with check. I can also play knight c6. Both look pretty good. Kind of like taking the bishop with check. This piece is sort of a two-way piece, looking at both sides of the board. Yeah, let's play that one. Forces white to recapture. And then probably knight c6, or maybe bishop e7 followed by castling. I like the fact that I have 2 center pawns against none at this point. Yeah, let's go knight c6. Still being vigilant here, though. We cannot relax, especially when I'm behind in development. Okay, white castles. Now, I'm thinking bishop d6. I could also play bishop e7, a little more restrained, but I like the d6 square shooting at this pawn on h2. Yeah, it also covers the g3 square in case white has some designs to swing their queen over there. So let's go ahead and play this. Oh, you guys might notice that my cam setup looks a little different. I am, in fact, standing right now. Yeah, so within the past couple weeks, I got a standing desk. I don't think I posted on YouTube since I got it. Maybe I posted one video. I can't recall, but I've been trying to switch it up. You guys know, if you've been watching this channel for a while, I've been dealing with a voice issue the past like 4 or 5 months. And being able to stand and speak, in addition to sit and speak, just having a little bit more mobility when I'm talking has made a pretty big difference. And my voice is not yet in the ballpark of what I'd feel comfortable like doing long streams and longer videos with, but I manage, and just changing it up like this does help. I might even go back to sitting like mid video at some point. You never know. So, all right, 92. So white repurposes this knight. I think that's a decent idea. It has some influence on these squares. I wonder if they're going to go to d4. One idea for me is if I can sneak in a5 and bishop a6, I think I'm going to be pretty happy. I think for now, probably castling makes a lot of sense. e5 looks pretty good. Kind of leaning towards castling, though. Yeah, let's play the necessary move. I want to get my king to safety and not mess around here too much. Okay, white goes to g3, so that does block the bishop. Yep. I don't think white has much of a kingside attack to speak of. So because this knight is inching closer to the king side, I'm considering what happens if white plays something like knight h5. I think I have queen h4 there at minimum to hit the pawn and the knight. So maybe I have a good free hand now to play this a5 move, looking to set up bishop a6 with this skewer. And let's see if white notices that, because if white's playing quickly here, that's something that may escape their attention. They should be a little suspicious of me pushing a seemingly random rook pawn up the board, though. So let's see if white notices it. I think rook e1 would be a good response, or maybe moving the queen, like queen f3. Could try to get the bishop out this way, but I like keeping this pawn on e6 for now because it controls the f5 square. All right, white plays b3. So I think this kind of addresses the threat. Bishop a6, white can go c4. I'm just thinking, let's say we get a trade there. Maybe I play bishop e5 at that point. Yeah, I'm liking the look of that. Yeah, let's play bishop a6. So got the skewer, c4. Take. And then because the queens are in opposition to one another, I'm looking at bishop moves. Bishop takes g3 would hit the queen, but white could recapture with their queen. And I see I could win a pawn there, but I don't like that their dark square bishop could come to life and start causing some havoc. So I'd rather just stay up a pawn, if it's only a pawn, with 2 bishops versus bishop and knight, versus trading into an opposite color bishop, ending even if I'm up 2 pawns, because I don't want to lose the initiative. So I'm thinking take on c4 and then play this bishop e5 move. I really like the look of that. Anything else white can do after I take? I don't think so. Don't think there's much that makes sense. So I shatter my own structure, but I'm doing it for a specific concrete reason. Because I want to get this bishop e5 move in. And I think I'm going to win another pawn and stay away from an opposite color bishop position. Remember, there is a 5-second increment on this one. And I know I'm in the lead in the position as of now, but you never know. It could get into a time pressure situation. Just nice to have that increment. Let's pre-move rook f8 takes d8. I think almost certainly I'm going to take with this rook. I envision this rook potentially coming to the b file. So just pre-moving this. Don't think white can really do much other than trade queens here. Since white is the one down material, they would love to keep queens on board, but it's just not feasible due to the attack on the rook in the corner. So yeah, white's going to have to do this. This is all correct. And I'm noticing now, if I take on c4, I may even win this pawn on a2 as well. So let's capture here. Now really showcasing the power of the bishops. Ooh, and I notice I have this move too, bishop c3. Bishop c3, I guess there's bishop g5. This is a super tempting move because if the rook moves off the back rank, rook d1 is a killer. And white doesn't have a safe move for that rook on the back rank. But if I'm being real vigilant here, bishop c3 can be met by this counterattacking move, bishop g5. And then bishop takes e1, bishop takes d8. I guess I can play bishop takes f2 if I want. Or maybe just take their bishop and then take a2 at the end. All of this looks winning, but this might be cleaner. And it's possible I could even get an improved version of this on the next move. So I'm in a nice spot here. I'm just comparing lines that I think will win. There's also bishop d3. I know this bishop's under attack, but it's not really under attack, at least right now, because I have rook d1 in reply, which will be mate in a couple. So yeah, I think bishop takes a2 is the thing to do here. And notice all these squares are covered. So if white's going to save the rook, they got to go to b6 or b7. And I think then I drop the bishop c3 move. When a counterattacking move is no sweat, because I can play bishop takes e1, bishop takes d8, and then simply recapture. And I will be up a piece in that transaction. I should note, though, if I play bishop c3 here, bishop g5, some of you may be thinking, well, what if you play f6 to try to say that there's two pieces under attack? I did look at that, but then white gets to use the c1 square. So rook e to c1. And with my bishop stacked, again, I think that's still good for me, but it's not a win of a piece as far as I can tell. Or if it is, it's complicated. Like maybe I can go bishop d3 there, but I'm going to pull the trigger on bishop takes a2. This just looks way simpler. So we're playing it. Yeah, just really nice that the bishops and the pawns control so many squares. I could calculate bishop g5 here too, but I think f6 will actually work out pretty well against that one. Yeah, white plays rook b7, and bishop c3 is going to be my move unless I see some very strong reason not to. But now let's do it. This is a rook on the 7th, but my king looks plenty safe. Not enough firepower here for white to do any harm. Oh, and by the way, if they go here, I should mention I have bishop c4. I didn't point that out, so that's pretty important that my bishop can come back. I don't even know, if I'm being totally honest, I don't think I saw that. Maybe I sensed that was the case, but that is important with my bishop coming to a2, that I no longer was on c4, patrolling f1. I mean, actually, now that I think about it, rook f1, bishop c4, bishop g5. I guess I can go f6 there, rook c1, and then maybe I just take the bishop, because at that point, since white doesn't have both rooks on the first rank, rook takes c3 will still run into rook d1. So there are some tactics based around the fact that white hasn't moved a pawn in front of their king. You know, speaking of the opening for a second, I know this game's still going, but maybe I can touch on this. I think the Alekhine's defense is a bit of an underrated opening. It's, I'd say, in the same category as the Scandinavian at the higher levels. You see it every once in a while, but the top level players don't like to play it too often. I think they see it as a slightly second tier defense. But for anyone who's not a super GM, I honestly think all these openings are fine. And the most important thing is, do you like them? And maybe an ancillary question, do you have more experience in them compared to your opponents? I think that's an incredibly important question to ask, because if you're a, let's say, e4, e5 player, and black, I get this move in. If you're an e4, e5 player, or an e4, c5 player like a Sicilian, you can certainly have more experience than your opponent in some lines there, but that's not a guarantee at all. But if you play something like the Alekhine's defense, or the Scandinavian, or the Peertz, pretty good chance if you've played those for a while, you will just have much more experience than your opponents. Okay, so yeah, again, this is not checkmate, at least yet, because I don't have the bishop on c4. I'm debating between playing bishop c4 myself now and threatening mate in one, or just taking their bishop. I think bishop c4 is most accurate here. Looks really good. My back rank is protected. I've still got this rook here. So let's play the bishop c4 move. And white can escape mate, but they're going to have to give up both minor pieces to do it, as far as I can tell. And the bishops, you can really see the power of the bishops when they're side by side or on adjacent diagonals. That's what's been putting in work for me the past several moves. So yeah, white does play h3, making some luft for the king to come to h2. Let's take the knight with check. I'm going to pre-move this or just quickly play rook takes c1. It also defends the bishop. Yeah, not much for white to do here. Maybe I'll even throw in a g6 type move if I really want to, but I don't even think it's going to be necessary. Yeah, here I think bishop check, force g3, and then bishop d5. I really like the look of that because if white takes this pawn on f7, I can mate them on h1. Notice again the bishops side by side, and I just forced some weaknesses on the light squares, and we immediately pounce. This is a Morphe's mate if I get it in. By the way, the Checkmate Patterns Manual on Chessable, I'm biased because I did the videos for it, but awesome course if you want to learn and review fundamental checkmate patterns. Fantastic course. Okay, thanks to my opponent for the game. Drop him a little note in the chat. Appreciate it, Sam. So, I do think this was downhill for white ever since they lost that pawn on e5. That is not an atypical outcome in an opening or a structure like this. White has to be precise about how they defend their pawns. They have to have a game plan in mind for that. And that's why I think f4 would have been the move here, strengthening the e5 pawn. Just so if c5 is played, you have an insurance policy. If ever I knock out this pawn on d4, white doesn't have to exclusively rely on that pawn or rely on the knight in defending e5. They've got some support from the side here. So maybe as played after c takes d4, white would have done better to play knight e2, just to try to keep this knight defending this pawn for a little while. Let's say knight e2, knight c6, bishop f4, because I was double attacking e5. It does kind of seem like that pawn's going to be lost, though, in the near future. I could maybe even try to go after it right now. But at least something like this looks a little more dynamic. Yeah, maybe castles here, knight b5 or bishop b5's in the air. Actually, maybe bishop b5 check right at this moment. And if bishop d7 take, I can't take back with either piece. If I take with the queen, I drop the knight. Taking with the knight drops the queen. So I think white had to look for something more dynamic like that. When white took with the knight, I took on e5. Yeah, queen e2, probably not the best either. I might have actually pulled this bishop back if I were white to keep more pieces on board. Because we settled into a position where my pawn structure was super solid. I had the bishop pair. My king was safe. No pawn action for white or initiative to speak of. Too tough to get counterplay out of this. Yeah, and I think this is pretty easily winning once we get here. I take off another pawn, take a third pawn, so I'm up 3 pawns at this point. Still trying to be accurate, though. Notice we were doing a lot of move order comparison there. What if I play bishop c3 first versus bishop takes a2? We'll see if the engine approves of that. But a lot of this was determined by the tenor of the opening, the direction that this went after I got in c5 and took on d4. One other comment. So in this opening, e5 on move 2 is by far the main move, at least at the higher levels. So black moves the knight again, and then white can play d4, or sometimes they play c4. Black's whole strategy in this Alekhine's defense is to try to goad these pawns forward and attempt to prove that they're weaknesses. So often you'll see white engaging the c pawn. Sometimes white might use the f pawn even here. There's some really interesting theory in this type of line. But basically, black is trying to go these pawns forward and attempt to prove that they're weaknesses. But black risks getting a cramped position in the process. Okay, let's click into the game review. We'll see what it says. Yeah, so 81% for my opponent, 97.8 for me. Yeah, I wonder, if we're on Lichess, I could maybe check this with the Lichess database, but I wonder how often at the amateur level white plays knight c3. I think probably fairly often because, I know in the Scandinavian, to draw a parallel, at the master level, you rarely see knight c3 or e5 on move 2. They're just known not to be too challenging. But at the amateur level, you actually see them pretty frequently. And I suspect the Alekhine's defense is kind of similar, where the mentality is perhaps, oh, I don't want to play e5 because that's what you expect me to play. I'm going to play something that just defends. Or I'm just going to make, maybe white's a Vienna player, and they're just like, I'm going to play the move that I play against e5 on move 1. Maybe we'll even transpose, which is an option, by the way. So there could be sort of like a mentality of just keeping it simple and staying within your repertoire with a move like this. But it does give black options, and e5 probably is the best move here. d5, I think, is also pretty good. But yeah, e5 for white on move 2, that's the critical thing to do. And in fact, let's just turn on the opening book to see the split here. Yeah. So out of 34K games in this database, which is master games, and over 27,000 of them, white is playing e5 and scoring appreciably better, I would say, with e5 versus knight c3, where actually black is scoring a lot better. You always wonder about the sample size. Like, I would bet the average rating for black is higher in those games because it's not like white is objectively worse after knight c3. So that plays into my point about the relative popularity of these moves at different levels. Okay, so let's go back to the analysis here. Turn off this feedback. Yeah, knight c3, d5, e5. So if white had taken, I take here. I've actually had some games from the white side where I go bishop c4 in this position. And if take, I think you can play this move queen f3 if you want and attack f7 before picking up the knight. Black also plays knight b6 a lot here. I've had some games like this where black tries to develop or might play e6. We're in semi-offbeat territory, I'd say. Not too far out there, but not so common. So yeah, after e5, let's again look at the opening book. I'm just kind of curious myself. So right here, yeah, knight fd7 is the main move. Knight e4 played a fair amount, though, and actually scoring better than I thought. I know this can lead to some weird theory. Yeah, knight ce2, because white can try to encircle this knight. Black plays d4. Yeah, I'm not familiar with this. This looks vaguely familiar. White trying to win the piece back in some way. Interesting. Huh. Black tries to do something like this. I guess tries to prove that that pawn on d4 isn't the best. Okay, so knight e4 maybe a line to look into. Looks enterprising. And again, d4, this is a pretty drawish continuation. You can see this huge gray bar here in the middle. Now there's a line that goes take on f6, take on c3, and then take on g7. If black were to take back on g7, white takes back on c3, and white has won a pawn. White has 7 pawns to black's 6. But black can throw in this move first with check. Remember, checks are always sequence stoppers. And then queen takes d2, you get a queen trade. I know this position has been reached many times, and yeah, you can just tell huge amount of draws here. So somewhat of an imbalance, but not enough that between two good players, this isn't going to normally produce draws. So just another variation. Okay, I played knight fd7. Yeah, we start to split a little bit here. d4, f4, e6. e6 is an interesting move to try to jam black up. I don't think white should have enough compensation here, though. Kind of curious. Throw the engine on that real quick. Okay, well, the engine disagrees. It says, by virtue of this equal evaluation, in effect, it thinks white does have compensation. Yeah, because queen h5 can be met by g6 at any point. Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't have minded playing something like this, but the dark square bishop does take some effort to get in the game. Black's king is a little bit open. I probably try to do this. I got to watch the e6 square. So, yeah, if you're looking for an enterprising option from the white side this time, in this exact position, e6 does look interesting. Yeah, there's this f4 move too. This could maybe transpose, especially if we get something like this. This is a line from the French defense, like I said. So as played, white played that d4 move. Let's go back to our opening reference. e6, defend the pawn in the center. Yeah, and now here you can tell the number of games. So it went from 7,000 games, a half move back, up to 14,000 or more. What does that tell us? That tells us we've transposed to a different opening. And we're catching more games from a different line. So in this case, the French, where if it had gone like this, e4, e6, d4, d5, d5 being met with knight c3, knight f6, e5, and then knight fd7. And you can see that's the same number of games that we get from this position right here. So some databases handle transpositions differently. I think it would actually be helpful if databases told you when a transposition was coming or you had just merged with a certain line. But you can sometimes notice that by looking at the number of games. Yeah, and I think here f4 is the way to go. It looks like white does play knight f3 or, yeah, knight ce2 is another move. That's pretty sophisticated. Knight ce2, the idea being to play c3 in response to c5. Kind of like a French advance, more conventional advanced French, where white is saying, I want to defend with the c pawn, and if ever you take, I want to take with my wing pawn to support the central structure. Because it's crucial for white to understand that black is going to go for c5 in these positions and start attacking from the wing to try to destabilize this pawn center. There's another break in the French, which is the f6 break. I think people index too much on the f6 break in the French, honestly. Sometimes it's played, but certainly early on, the c5 break is way more important to try to knock out the d pawn. So yeah, that's a creative move there. It blocks in the bishop and the knight. I wouldn't expect too many people to play that unless they, were like 1600 plus or something. I think most players are going to kind of do what my opponent did in this game, like moves that look normal, knight f3, bishop d3, but don't take the proper care in terms of respecting the pawn structure and defending that structure. So yeah, f4 does it. Let's just see how the games often go from here. Knight c6, yeah, bishop e3. This line has a huge amount of theory. Sometimes black throws this in, looking to advance. Black can also take and get positions like this, where black tries to attack the center. White may end up castling queenside. Also defends around the d4 point. Yeah, so French defense players, this is old hat for you. But interesting to see the merging from the Alekhine's defense. Okay, so as played in the game, knight f3. Let's throw the engine on. I go c5. Yeah, and it starts to kind of tick in black's favor if white doesn't play an absolutely only move here, knight e2. So if take with this knight, this is somewhat similar to a line I mentioned coming up. So again, it looks a little odd here, but maybe not too late to play that and then meet this with c3. White played bishop d3. I was debating between knight c6 right away and taking. Looks like both are good. So yeah, I took. White took with the knight. Yeah, knight e2. So this is the line I mentioned. If something like this happened, bishop f4. White trying to defend this pawn. Yeah, I could give checks if I want. What about queen c7? Okay, queen c7, not so great. I think I did mention this actually. So if here, I was saying bishop b5. Looks like even castling would be okay. Yeah, because white has a lot of ideas in mind. I'm a little bit shaky here. So I think white does have to, after c takes d4, get creative and think about ways to parlay this loss of a pawn into some sort of initiative, some sort of way to pressure me before I settle in and consolidate that pawn and get my pieces out and get castled, basically. So knight takes d4, knight takes e5. Yeah, again, I think I would have played this bishop back. The engine's saying castle. It's tough already because that was, again, a pretty important pawn. And white just doesn't have pawn play of their own to speak of. So these pawns in the center are unopposed, and they control territory. And they're keeping white's pieces at bay. The fact that I only have one piece out doesn't feel so bad here. Queen e2 takes. I'm going to go kind of fast through this unless I notice anything really significant. Of course, if you're playing white in a situation like this, you just got to be feisty. You got to try to put yourself in your opponent's shoes and ask them on every move, like, what would be the most uncomfortable move for my opponent in this better or winning position to face? What would I not want to see if I had their position? And that can give you a good indication about what your strategy should be. And a lot of times, that's going to mean taking on messy positions and potentially more risk. Because if you're statically worse or you're down material and it's going downhill anyways long term, you might as well get your hands dirty, right? You might as well try to throw a few logs on the fire and stoke that bad boy, because you're going to lose regardless. And I've seen a lot of people just lose in kind of pedestrian fashion by trading down and agreeing to prolong the game but have no real chances. Much better to take some risk if you can and just see what happens. But it's hard here for white. I don't really see too many opportunities for them to do that. So yeah, white did this knight maneuver. Not sure what it really accomplished, but I don't think the engine's suggesting too many better moves. I can imagine something like this. Yeah, b3. This looks pretty routine. I think had this happened, I probably would have gone in the direction of e5. Connect these pawns and have options of advancing. But, also just trying to get my light square bishop out. Maybe something like this and bishop f5. Centralize the rooks. Look for a selected moment to push forward with the pawns. That's probably the direction I would have aimed for. Maybe still a5, bishop a6, although if I'm not getting a skewer, I think I might just want to go this direction. All right, so this knight maneuver, a5. Yeah, and white did address that kind of, but I feel like they probably have to play rook e1 because the whole b3, c4 thing just didn't happen to work out well for white. So something like this might have been more judicious. And hey, I mean, if I play e5 and white gets in knight f5 when my bishop is missing in action and can't take the knight, this could get kind of complicated. Let's say I try to keep this piece. Yeah, they can throw in wild moves like this, maybe. Bishop h6. Takes. Here, take. Yeah. And I can't take back thanks to the pin. So I would lose my queen. And also if I play king h8, I'm getting mated on g7. So, yeah, rook e1 does look correct here. And maybe look for an opportunity to play on the king side if possible. Okay, so this all occurred. Interesting that the engine wants me to go bishop e5 first. It's not a huge difference in the eval, but I do wonder why that is. Okay, so here it says white should not take back on c4. Yeah, queen e3, I mean, I would assume at minimum I just take. But okay, rook d1. Yeah, I don't put too much stock into that. Bishop e5 versus taking. Looks like pretty much all roads lead to Rome here for me. Again, just very tough for white. So we trade bishop e5, nice little double attack. Yeah, rook b1. White could try to attack too, but even if something like this happened, we just get a big old swap down. I take on c4. I'm up 2 clear pawns in the endgame. I don't think this would be that difficult to convert, but white does have a knight, so they still have a chance. So rook b1, bishop takes c4, hit this rook. And here's where I was just debating between bishop c3 and bishop takes a2. Again, the engine says the move I played, bishop takes a2, isn't best. Let's see what I missed. So here, bishop g5, I was mentioning this. b6. Now, I thought this move in reply. And now bishop takes a2. Oh, okay, so it's kind of similar to what I tried to do in the game. There's a lot of moving parts here. There's like 3 different attacks going on, but basically it's similar because if rook b7, I can take here. How similar is it, though? Check, knight f1, because I don't have bishop here. Okay, just push the pawn. Yeah, I suppose black is just up 3 pawns at the end of this. So these lines are all winning. I'm just trying to see these tactical subtleties, why certain lines are better than others. Now it changes mine. Now it says bishop takes a2, or they're close to even. Yeah, bishop c3. And again, if rook f1, I should have mentioned this move. I don't think I noticed it, but now bishop c4 would work. And again, white doesn't have a square for the rook to go to. So I'd win the exchange at minimum. Yeah, and this was just a cleanup job from here. Just always, always, always being vigilant. I told this to a student yesterday who's rated about 2100. You got to be paranoid about and in chess. It has to border on paranoia when you're calculating. That's the only way you can develop like a keen sense of danger. So the difference between someone who's okay in calculation versus someone who's great, in my opinion, is just how constantly vigilant that they are. And the great players just have this sense of danger they built up through what I can only call like basically paranoia about what your opponent is going to try to do against you, your opponent's resources, and the fine tension between both sides competing for the best moves. All right, and that was that. And yeah, had white taken here, I was ready for this Morphy's mate with the bishop defending. Pretty classic combination. Okay, so again, thanks to my opponent for the game. You can consider the Alekhines if you want. I know in terms of streamers, Grandmaster Alexander Bortnik is a big Alekhines player. I think he's even writing a course on it. Danya plays it a lot too. I've seen his streams, and he's been dabbling with it for several years. So those are 2 guys you could look into. And yeah, you would expect to face a lot of knight c3 or maybe even knight f3, just blundering the pawn, in addition to e5, which is the main move. And the one, as you go up in rating, you can expect to face increasingly often. And again, black's idea here is knight d5 and start chipping away at the pawns. Okay, and I'd say the broader point too, when you get into this type of structure, a pawn in your opponent's half of the board, supported by 1, maybe 2 pawns or a minor piece or something, just think really hard about that situation, because we know from on this channel seeing lots of games where that occurs, whether it's out of the French or the Caro-Kann. This line in the Caro-Kann was c5, which I know many of you are familiar with because of Levy's influence and how popular the Caro is right now. It's the same concept, like trying to knock out d4. And quite often that succeeds. Like quite often positions like this go down where black's knocking out a center pawn. I guess somehow this is okay for white, but you get my drift. White really has to consider closely how to defend this structure. And the most reliable way is typically a pawn from c3. And the strong players kind of know how to set that up in advance. Or, maybe use the f pawn as support as well. Okay, thanks again to Sam for the game. Let me know if you have any questions or comments on this one. And I'll be back again soon with another video. This was a 40-minute standing video, so I'm feeling good. All right, later, guys.